Cool. All right. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the live Q&A with Luca Dellanna here at Fat Tony's. Luca is an independent complexity and emergent behavior researcher, management guru, 5 times author, and operational excellence consultant. So, well, 7 times author.
Seven. By the time, yes.
7. I'm
all
behind.
description.
So, welcome, Luca.
Hell yeah.
How are you?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. I'm good, and you?
Yeah, really good. So tonight I'm just going to run over how this works and the setup here before we kick off talking to Luca. So as you guys know, you're in the Fat Tony's video room. This is the events room. There's also an events chat room. We'd like to spend tonight getting you guys asking Luca as many questions as possible. So if you want to ask Luca a question throughout this in the events chat room, just type, I want to ask a question, or give a thumbs up emoji or a bunch of gibberish. It doesn't matter. As long as you trigger an alert, we can hand the microphone over to you. And yeah, you can talk to Luca. So I guess before we do that, Luca, can you just give us a little bit of background to yourself? I know you started off your career as an automotive engineer. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey from that to independent complexity science researcher?
Yes, so I indeed graduated my master's as an automotive engineer, and then I moved to Frankfurt, and I've been working for a few years in management consulting in Frankfurt in Germany. But contrary to what people think, not at all in finance, but I were mostly on operations in companies doing mechanical manufacturing, chemical manufacturing, and so on. And then after a few years, I felt like I've learned enough, and I wanted to have more time to work on my projects and to do things following my methodology. And so I quit the work at my company. I moved back to Italy, and I began opening a practice as management consultant. And then at the beginning, I had a lot of free time because you're building contacts and so on. So I began actually doing some research and then publishing my works as research, as books. And then, I've kept doing this for the last few years.
Fantastic. And no looking back, I'm guessing.
No. Yeah, I'm very happy right now.
Nice. Well, yeah, it's great to have you here this evening. So I suppose let's kick off with a couple of questions. I'm sure Jack has got a bunch of questions for you as well. One thing I've been keen to talk to you about is kind of complexity in relation to public policy. And I know coronavirus, COVID, has been a real hot topic in the last year. But I wanted to ask you about post-COVID, and in England, in the UK, and I think in Italy as well. Today in Italy, I think was the first day they've eased lockdowns, and people can go to restaurants and bars again in some areas. In the UK, we're starting to see infections come down and a dialogue about lifting lockdown. Do you think it's going to be easy for governments to maybe give up some of the powers that they've had over the last year? And I suppose from your point of view as a consultant, what will be your view, and how would you theoretically advise governments on that transition?
It's very local dependent. There is no good single advice for all governments. Actually, one of the reasons why I was talking much more about the pandemic last year than this year is because last year, especially in March and in February, there was one single advice for everyone. Mm-hmm. Try to block, to reduce travel, wear face mask, and so on and so forth. And that kind of applied to everyone. Whereas right now, the solutions are much more local dependent. So for example, Italy is doing lockdowns very differently from the US, for example. And the risk of both the risks of the people running out of money, running out of jobs are very different in Italy and in the US. the risk of the government keeping power are very different. The structure is different, the density, population density, how the hospitals are structured, everything is different. So right now it's very difficult to say things that apply everywhere.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, I saw this last fall when I was talking about the lockdowns, and just even the word lockdown has different meanings in different countries.
Mm-hmm.
What lockdown means to a person in China is different to what it means to a person in Italy, which is different from what it means to a person in the US. In Italy, for example, right now we have these oscillating lockdowns. So the government put some criteria and they put different levels of lockdown.
Mm-hmm.
And every week, almost automatically, based on like some parameters, which should be objective, they're not really objective,
Mm-hmm.
but pseudo-objective, automatically the region level lockdown changes.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, in my city, we've had 4 or 5 lockdowns this year, and every 2 weeks, like we're changing and it adapts. And so people, they're kind of like more likely to believe that like it's following these rules. And so, for example, starting from tomorrow, there will be the first region in Italy, or starting from the day after tomorrow, that is free from all kind of lockdowns almost. And so if you talk to an Italian, this is like the idea that they have of a lockdown. Whereas instead, I hear when I talk on Twitter about some people, I hear about like lockdowns that have been never ending since last year. And so you have like different risks, different perceptions. Then also like, I don't know the US that well, but my perception is that there are different kinds of like social nets, structures, how much people are reliant on getting income this very month, what happens with school, what happens with schools if the kids are not going to school. So it's extremely difficult. That said, something that I think everyone could do is stuff like write a list of measures which are ordered.
Mm-hmm.
So right now a big problem is that the measures, they don't have an order. So you have some measures like face mask, closing schools, closing restaurants, and you do not really have an order. And that means that the local politician or like the local government is deciding, and the population, they feel like they are at the mercy of the government. They don't really know if they have an incentive. Like, yes, if they, and then
This is the
the result,
California situation.
yes, and then the result is that people that do not want the lockdown, then they are against everything. And so, for example, they're also against face masks. Whereas in reality, face mask is maybe how you avoid longer lockdowns.
Mm-hmm.
So instead, in my opinion, there should be like an ordered list. And on some of those things, we can agree based on cost benefit, upside, downside. So, for example, face masks are one of the probably the lowest downside, highest upside, and instead closing restaurants has a bigger downside. I mean, for the business and so on. So, of course, like there should be an order, and face masks should stay longer than restaurants close. And once you have an ordered list, then the discussion changes. It's not anymore like government bad, government good, but it's more like what is the current threat level, what is the correct. So it changes the discussion more productively.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can decide to put some parameters, and then it becomes an incentive. Like you know that if a target is reached, then the lockdown will ease. And that, I think, that is one of the reasons for which almost everyone in Italy likes face mask, or maybe I don't say likes, but like a lot of people are wearing it. Like you don't hear, I'm not saying that no one says face masks are useless or face masks restrict freedom, but they are doing it to a much lower point than I hear in other countries.
Yeah.
So I think that this could be like one thing that can be applied almost everywhere.
I think that's really interesting. There's a couple of points there that really resonate with me in the UK. I think there's a similar situation here where we not only have different regions having different levels of lockdown, but the definition of lockdown, this tier system, tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, where the goalposts are changing continuously, almost every day. And there's a real fatigue that sets in with the population because there's no clear roadmap out of lockdown. And there's a lot of pressure here, on Boris Johnson, on the Prime Minister here, to publish some kind of roadmap with metrics. And what you also said really made me think of something Rory Sutherland said about one of the biggest innovations on the London Underground system wasn't an increase in efficiency or more comfort. It was the signs that tell you how long a train will be delayed for, because you'd much rather be delayed for 10 minutes knowing it's going to be delayed than 5 minutes not knowing when the train will arrive. And I think there's a similar situation here with lockdown. It sounds like in Italy and in the UK as well, where we're just not being given any metrics, any timeline, any coherent rules at all, really. So people just become pessimistic, and they start, start thinking about anti-masking and things like that as a knock-on effect from this kind of lack of clarity.
Yeah. And then if I can add a second point regarding the vaccine rollout, one thing which I think should have been done and was especially relevant in January and February is the idea that right now we have like a lot of difference in like how countries are quick or slow with the vaccine and so on and so forth. And even within the countries, you have some regions that perform much better, as in they're able to give more doses than other regions. And for me, I don't like I can see the rationale of equality of giving the same doses of vaccine across Europe, depending on the population, kind of. But to me, what I would have made more sense is that you give a small batch of doses everywhere, and then when they are about to run out, you give more doses. Which is what a lot of companies are doing. It's called like Kanban. It's a way of like Kanban system, some they call it, or like it's the idea that you pull the vaccine instead of pushing it. And it's good because you avoid the like areas where the vaccine is stocked or areas where they're not good. And not only it allows to maximize the speed at which the vaccine is delivered because you avoided the inefficiencies, but also it puts skin in the game in the people which have the deficiencies, because like immediately you know that like if they're delivering less doses of vaccine to your region, then maybe you do something and maybe you remove the incompetent minister or you do some changes. So I think that would have been another thing which has a relatively low downside, high upside. Yeah.
So, that's interesting.
Jack, from a US perspective, and coronavirus, obviously it's much more federalized, and there's almost a patchwork system of regulations. But from your perspective in the US, how does that resonate with you?
I'm no expert on the subject. There's some debate about if the U.S. is doing. I'd be interested in what Luca thought if the U.S. is doing a good job or bad job. But I do know that this push and pull problem is a thing. We've had a lot of famous cases of throwing away vaccines. We got, because it's federally regulated, like you were talking about. There was cases of who is it? The person stuck in traffic with an expiring vaccine who was giving it out to other people, and it was kind of a hero story until she like got arrested, I think. And things like that. So I couldn't speak to how we're doing per se necessarily because I hear a lot of conflicting stuff. But I'm 100%. Well, I think that poll. I think that would makes sense almost anywhere. So yeah, sounds good to me. I put Luca in charge. If you want to come here, replace Fauci. I'm not super against that.
So going back to things like anti-maskers and stuff. In your book, The Control Heuristic, you talk about that as a rule in which the human brain actions in order to minimize risk. On a collective scale of not just an individual level but on a societal level, how does that gel with things like anti-maskers who maybe aren't taking logical decisions to ensure the minimalization of collective risk in society?
That I'm pointing in the control heuristic is that we do not act to minimize risk, but we act to minimize. Now it's not the complete sentence, but we act to minimize perceived risk. Mm-hmm. Or even more precisely, I make the point in the book that we do not seek survival, but we seek what feels like survival. And that's, for example, one of the reasons why, for example, we like sugar so much, because sugar to our ancestors would have felt like survival in an environment where there is very little sugar. And then our ancestors, the ancestors that had that were developing behavioral enforcement to sugar and were more likely to seek sugar and so on and so forth, they survived more. So for us, sugar feels like survival. And then, of course, right now it's not like this, because now we have the opposite problem. We have too much sugar, for example. Mm-hmm. But so the point is that we seek what feels like survival. So the question is, if for some people, they feel like the government oppression is a big threat, and speaking out against face mask feels like survival, then that's what they're going to do. Mm-hmm. Or if they're looking for status and somehow they get a lot of people liking their post if they say face mask suck and so on, then liking feels like survival. Mm-hmm. And that's why they're going to do it. And so there is this big subjective aspect. And we can discuss a lot about the short term. And in the short term, also, it's hard to say, because on one side, yes, I can have discussions with anti-maskers and I can tell them they're wrong, but I cannot go to their houses and force them to wear a face mask. Mm-hmm. At most, I can prevent them from walking in public spaces if they don't have a face mask. But so in the short term, you have a lot of discussions on where's the boundary, what you can do, what you cannot do. I think that it's important, though, that we think about the long term, because in the long term we can focus on teaching some principles, mm-hmm. Not necessarily telling people what they have to do, but just showing what's important. Mm-hmm. For example, one thing very basic that I think we should teach in all schools is the principle that evidence of absence is not absence of evidence. Sorry, the other way around. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. And then you can let people taking their own decisions. Or another thing which I'm very skeptical, which I think we should give a lot of importance is we should build some statues right now to celebrate the people who got it right during the pandemic. Or mm-hmm. So, for example, in my opinion, there should be in each square, there should be a square a statue to the people who actually, I don't know, they sounded the alarm, or they face masked, or they whatnot, for example. And instead, I'm quite disappointed by the fact that instead I see that we are more likely to build statues for Cuomo, for example. Mm-hmm. He's been given prizes, whereas instead he did a lot of idiot things. Mm-hmm. And so I think that towards the objective of preventing the next pandemic or the next big risk, it's very important that right now we take some good decisions on whose statues we would build.
Absolutely, absolutely. Hey, can I ask you a question? Since we're talking about the control heuristic. Also, for everybody listening, this is a fantastic book. You have a bunch of good books. Control heuristic was really, really, really good. And I know you're selling it on Amazon and everything. So everyone here should go buy it right now and then come back to this talk in 15 seconds. But one topic, and this is off of the pandemic, is risk homeostasis, which I always thought was fascinating for a lot of reasons. But one of them is, as you know, I love extreme sports. I love to skateboard. And I know tons of pro skaters, pro snowboarders, pro bikers, all kinds of, people like that are my friends. And I have noticed something, which is that across most levels, whether it's people tend to have a risk appetite that stays pretty consistent. And this risk, for something like skateboarding or something super dangerous like skydiving, your risk appetite stays the same, but as you get better, you get more comfortable with other things. So it kind of like, you almost like work it like a muscle a little bit. But anyway, I just thought this was an interesting topic. I just wonder if you could talk about it for a minute, kind of explain risk homeostasis, and then answer the question, if I explained it right, do people, in your opinion, kind of have a risk level they kind of stay at? We might have lost Luca.
Yeah, I can't see him my side either. He's kind of frozen.
Oh no, my question was too long-winded.
Let's give him a minute to reconnect, and we'll let him answer.
Yeah.
And then we'll jump over. We got a couple of questions building up.
After this, let's go.
Did the Wi-Fi get out?
Hell yeah, perfect. Okay, we lost you first. Oh, Luca, you there? Sorry, everybody. Looking at the questions in here. Ooh, Bill's got a good one. How can you use your work competencies to identify and assess strategic vulnerabilities?
We've lost Luca. I think he's coming back in.
Yeah, right. Sorry, my Wi-Fi just disconnected for some reason.
That's okay,
no problem.
Welcome back.
We got you.
So, yeah, did you hear Jack's question, Luca?
I heard him up to when he was talking about skating.
Yeah, that sounds like me, of course. I was just wondering if you could just give us a minute on risk homeostasis, because I think it's a fascinating concept. And specifically answering the question of, do people, in your opinion, tend to have kind of a risk window they kind of stay at across the board?
Yeah, make the example of the car ABS, the anti-braking system. Mm-hmm. So before that, when you were driving and braking, then the car would slide, and that's dangerous. And then around the 80s, they introduced this anti-blocking system in all cars, which makes the car safer. And the result, though, is not that more fatal incidents decreased. Instead, they almost stayed the same, or even they increased. And instead, people were driving faster. And so the idea is that when risk homeostasis is the idea that whenever we have the choice between doing something safer with the same level of performance, or doing it with a higher level of performance at the same level of safety as before, then people, they usually decide to keep the level of safety similar and take more risks and more rewards. Sorry, so not take more risks, I mean taking more rewards. So they keep the level of safety constant and they take more rewards. More rewards, I mean more performance, so they're driving faster and so on and so forth. So why we do that? So if you think about the activity, the point of our activities is not just to do the activities, but usually we do the activities to grab some form of resource, which might be food, money, status, affiliation, time, or whatnot. And those resources, we use them to mitigate our other risks. So for example, if I'm driving, it makes sense for me, once I have the ABS, to drive faster, because by driving faster, I gain time. And time is a resource that I can use to mitigate other risks. For example, I can spend more time at home and mitigating the risk of divorce, or I can spend more time at the office and mitigating the risk of getting fired, and so on and so forth. So risk homeostasis is the level of risk that remains constant is only the risk of the activity. But overall, across all the risks in our life, we actually decrease it. So actually, the ABS did make our lives safer. It just didn't make driving safer. Because we decided to keep driving at the same level of safety and then grab more resources outside of driving, time, for example, which then we use to mitigate other risks in our life. Then, of course, we can discuss on the fact that some of these other resources that we grab are zero-sum games. And so at the end, we do not actually reduce the risk as a societal point of view. But from the individual point of view, we do decrease our overall risk, or at least the perception, which is what matters. Because before I said that we do not look for survival, but we seek what feels like survival. Which also means that we do not seek risk minimization, but we seek what feels like risk minimization. And
it also feels a little...
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, it almost feels like we pick our risk level for each activity and then gain as much value as humanly possible from that kind of starting point, from that kind of level we've chosen or subconsciously chosen.
Exactly, subconsciously is chosen. So I think that like the system by which we choose the level is not like conscious. But it's just like you do the activity like this at this risk level, and then something happens, and if it's good, it reinforces it, and reinforcing it usually also means reinforcing the risk-taking behavior. So the next time we do it more risky, and for example we drive faster, and then maybe we get almost an accident, and then that scares us, and scaring lowers the risk level the next time we drive, and so on and so forth. So you have like this risk adjustment, and then what you perceive across enough times is that actually you find an equilibrium. And so then you have the perception, you confabulate this process, and you think that it's an analytic, it's a deliberate decision, but it's not.
Great.
Yeah, thank you. Should we go, Sebastian, Luca? Should we go to some audience questions?
Let's go to William. Bill, I think he was the first one to jump on there.
Can we unmute him? I think it'd probably be more interesting if the people could ask them, but if not.
No, William, you're live.
Oh, hell yeah.
What's your question for Luca?
Hey guys, how are you? Good to see you. Luca, thanks a lot for taking the time on this. Really, really good discussion so far. Now, the question I had, without getting obviously into, what you're charging folks, there's a real issue I think that's out there at the strategic level about identifying strategic vulnerabilities and their associated risks, especially in areas that are novel, that maybe we haven't seen before. And so I just want to get your thoughts on that, about how your research or your competencies sort of help you to do that, and how you think about that problem.
Can you give me a topic, like an area of application?
Well, I think a useful topic these days, kind of given what's going on with COVID, is as I take a look at a nation, for instance, like the United States, and I have a novel biological organism, that makes people sick and kills people. How do I identify the areas of vulnerability within my nation to kind of address those things, to be prepared when something like that strikes? How would you identify those areas? I mean, another example is what we're seeing in Texas right now. Obviously there are people that I think looked at that and said, there are parts of the power grid that are definitely vulnerable because they don't have redundancy down there, and it's kind of built to the lowest cost. And so how would you, if you were not sort of knowledgeable about that stuff, using your competencies, how would you identify those types of vulnerabilities that could lead to systemic effect and potentially collapses of systems?
Yeah, well, that's interesting, because like you actually don't really need much competence, like specific competence, to do that. Like, for example, I do not need to be a biologist to know that if there is a virus and a country like China is locking down, then there is an extremely high chance that the virus will also affect the rest of the world, unless the rest of the world cuts the connection. So I think that it's not much about like having like specific domain competencies, but just about having a bit of common sense of asking yourself what can go wrong, and especially in seeing like things that went wrong somewhere else and imagining they can go wrong in your place. So, for example, what happened in Texas is not new from other places, as far as I know. It was just new for Texas. And other places they have like countermeasures. And for example, I heard, I think it was David Galbraith that today wrote that the next big power electricity issue that there will be in Texas won't be due to low temperatures, because there will be like a winterization of the power grid and everything. But the next big power disruption in Texas is likely to be either from terrorism or from some other kind of attack. And actually, the threats, they're kind of like the same. Like the big threats, at least, like we all know what they are. Like the difference is in how the threat might manifest or why. But like pandemic, no one needs big imagination to know that pandemic is a risk. We had it for thousands of years. Terrorism, wars, financial crisis, authoritarianism. I mean, the question is how exactly the threat will manifest. What's the path that the threat will take to hit us? That's the thing that it's very hard to predict, and actually you do not need to predict it. You need to know like what's the threat and what's the consequence that it can have. So for example, power destruction and terrorism. And then you do not really need to think about all the way in which a terrorism attack can disrupt the power supply. But you need to think how I build the power supply that can resist terrorism. And even if they seem like the same question, actually the second one is much more resistant question. Like the answers are much more resistant and to what you cannot know compared to the first one. Like you do not need to know the specifics of how a power grid can fail to build, or at least as a politician, you do not need to know it. Like for example, you can know that power grids can fail due to bad weather, and then as a politician you can say how you can mandate to some people and you say like I want you to build a power grid that is resistant to temperatures that are 10 degrees lower than the coldest temperature that we ever had in the region, for example. Or you can say to someone who builds a city, you can say it needs to resist floods, which are 2 times higher than the highest flood that we ever recorded, for example. And of course, I'm not saying this is complete, but it's already like an enormous step in the right direction.
Well, it's as a software engineer and programmer and all that, I can't help but think of redundancies where you have a situation where it's like either I have to think of every 1 in a million use case, or I just have to have backups that kick in case something goes down. And this is a case where I don't know the specifics of this, but everyone keeps saying that the Texas grid was super centralized. These had things to do with it. And it is one where, there's arguments that, a couple of years ago, if just a shit ton of diesel generators had been spread throughout Texas, that, a lot of this could have been mitigated. I mean, that would have been a huge effort unto itself, but it might not be work for logistical reasons or something. But I can't help but think of redundancies as these kind of catch-all cases. So you don't have to look for these, oh, it's a biological weapon transported via water system. Oh, now it's a terrorist attack via explosive. It's like, so I don't know.
Yeah, actually, there is a framework on this, and actually, by the way, I have this course on adaptive systems that starts next Tuesday, and we're exactly going through these. But just to give you an example of, so I guess that everyone here knows about antifragility, right? And
I think so. Yeah, a lot of Taleb people here. A lot of people who've read Taleb here.
Yeah, and one of the things that you have is that the anti-fragile is what benefits from stressors, right? But the anti-fragile also exhibits fragile responses. So for example, I am anti-fragile because if I go to the gym, my muscles get stronger. But if I lift a weight which is too strong, then I tear my muscle, right? So we are only anti-fragile within a certain range of stressor. And so you have a chart that looks like this. You have a chart that looks like this, and here you have the magnitude of the stressor, and here you have an area in which low stressors you have no damage. Here, medium stressor, you have anti-fragile reaction, and here, big stressor, and you have a fragile reaction. So what you want to do in any system is that you want to make the middle area as big as possible. And to make it as big as possible, to maximize the chances that the reaction that you have to events is anti-fragile, you need to move this one to the left and this one to the right. What does it mean? To move this one to the left, it means that like you need to make sure that a lower stressor causes damage. So you need to increase your sensitivity to damage. You need to decrease your pain threshold. And then the ways in which you can do it are multiple. So for example, you can make sure that like you make more incident investigations, even when the incident hasn't been big. So for example, you have 1 year in which the temperature goes below the minimum, the historical minimum. Even if the power grid doesn't break, you think like, oh, this is a risk, what we can do, and so on and so forth. And then the other possibility is that you increase this threshold over here. Right? So what are these thresholds? So this threshold is the threshold at which the first damage appears, because you need damage to trigger an anti-fragile reaction. And this is the threshold at which damage causes a functional impairment, causes the wall to stop functioning. Because you have a fragile reaction is when the things break as a wall. What's the distance between these? The distance between these is brittleness. Is the likelihood that given a damage, the situation like precipitates and goes to functional impairment or whatnot. And the antidote to brittleness is one of the biggest antidotes is redundancy. And you see it with everything. So for example, you can think that this is myself, and the more muscles I have, the more distance there is between when I break one single fiber and when I actually tear my muscle. Or you can think it as a warehouse. So this is how much stock is needed out of the warehouse during the day. This is the level of crisis that I have before I sit down for a meeting and I tell to people like we should change something. And this is how much stock actually causes me to stop functioning. So I cannot serve my obligations anymore. And what's the solution? You add more stock. Or in the power grid, what's the problem? Here is when the first node of the grid stops working. And here is where you have blackouts everywhere. And how do you solve this? How do you increase this distance? You add redundancy. And once you begin thinking with this framework, then all the right questions and a lot of right answers come to your mind. Yeah, and this is just something that we will see like in the adaptive systems course. Yeah.
And is that so? To ask, is that a course that people can sign up for? This one that's starting next week.
Yeah, so it's 5 lessons. It's 5 lessons, 90 minutes each. It's every Tuesday. It starts next Tuesday. It's relatively cheap compared to other courses, so it's only $300. And yeah.
Guys,
get on it.
What we'll do, when this goes onto YouTube, we'll just stick a link as well to Luca's homepage and course as well, just below the comments if anyone's interested. Great.
It's in the pinned tweet of my Twitter profile.
Awesome.
Very cool.
All right.
I'll tweet it out afterwards too. Next question we had lined up from Matthias in the chat. Matthias?
Matthias, he's at work listening, so he can't actually say it out loud. So he's asked me
Oh,
to
shit.
read it for you. But
Okay.
what he's asking, so he asked, what direction do you think autism should go, autism research? And do you have any ideas on how or what the focus, awareness, or attention is that can be described as restricted for some and too wide for others? So before you answer that, I suppose it's best just to give people a bit of context. Luca has published papers on autism research and theory of autism. So I know he's got a particular interest in this area, and I know Matthias is really interested as well.
Yes. Hi, Matthias, and thanks for the question, Matthias. So I also wrote a book, and as for all my medical research, the book is available for free, because I just think that medical research is just too important, and everyone should be publicly available. And it's very
Luca,
short.
this one, correct?
Yeah.
The world through a magnifying glass? Yeah, this is really good. This was a good one.
Thank you. Okay, so regarding research, oh boy, that's a complex topic, but I think that I have a lot of opinions on that. I think that there should be like less focus on lab-based research, or research made by studies, or research made by people who are not or experiencing, like they do not really have communication or not, or and like I hear like a lot of like techniques and behavioral ways to like courses on some methods on how to communicate, but like less prescriptive things, and much more about like explaining what's the perception of the person with autism. Because once you explain to other people how a person with autism perceives the world, why they are doing the things that they are doing, or why they are not doing the things that they are not doing, and so on and so forth, then it becomes much easier for like the parents or the friends to actually relate, or to actually, because then of course autism is a big spectrum, right? You have people who are almost completely unable to function, and you have or have serious difficulties, and you have people instead who would just look like a bit asocial, or even they look social and you don't even know that they are on the spectrum, and just because they learned how to, so it's very big, and that's problematic talking about this, because I'm focusing in the book, for example, I focus on like not the most severe cases. And of course, if I were to talk about the most severe cases, it would be different. But yeah, so focusing on understanding how people with autism perceive the world and why they do, so that then you can figure out how to explain to them things.
Luca, can I ask a clarification there? So it kind of sounds like what you're saying about current research is that essentially they're looking to identify like solutions, like autists do this, so you should treat them like that, like certain, but of course, like everybody is completely different, and it sounds like there isn't a lot of like prescriptive ways to generalize, or like the generalizations essentially aren't working. Is that accurate? Something like that?
Yes, but then of course I don't want to do myself like generalization, because like there are a lot of
course,
research,
yeah.
and a lot of that is actually excellent, and yeah, so I also don't want to generalize myself. And then again, it depends a lot on your perception, and also like, because maybe there is some research that works great with some people and terribly with others, and so on and so forth. What was the second question? The second part of the Matthias question?
So, any ideas on how or what focus, awareness, or attention is that it can be described as restricted for some and too wide for others?
So one big point that I make in the book is that it's not the spectrum usually how we see it is like this. And wait. So usually the spectrum is described like this. So you have a large part of the population which is completely not autistic. And then you have a bit of the population which is somehow on the autistic spectrum, the Asperger and so on. And then you have like severe cases or so on, right? Actually, what I believe is that the real curve is actually like this. So you get a complete curve. And here you have people I call like detailed, which means that they tend to see details and they do not see context. And this is problematic in social environments because a lot of communication is contextual. I can say a word, but if I say it smiling or if I say it angrily, it has two completely different different meanings, for example. And here instead, here you have the most of the population, which can see both some level of detail and is both very receptive to context. And then I hypothesize that here there is a part of the population which is terrible with details and basically only functions with context. And the thing is that we do not see it as a deficiency because most of our society is based on, it's a society, so it's based on social contact. And so that's what's considered normal. But for example, I believe that there are people, like for example, one field which brings a lot of attention to detail and not much to context are maths, computer science. And I believe that there are people which are on this side of the spectrum which are terrible at maths and computer science because they have trouble seeing some of the details which instead are everything that matters. But the thing is that if you have someone who is bad at maths, you just say it's bad at math, or you say like is lazy or whatnot. It's not considered a problem. So we do not see this side of the spectrum. But I believe that it's a spectrum with two tails.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
And this makes sense from a lot of point of view, because like when you ask yourself, what's the thing that's going on in our brain that actually causes like autistic perception? And there are different answers, and most probably there are multiple things that can cause similar symptoms. So it's a very complex thing. But it's likely to think, like, I think that it's plausible to imagine that just as a lot of things biologically, they're on a spectrum. So for example, there are people who are too tall and there are people who are too short. And you have people who produce, wait, I'm trying to make an example. You probably have people who produce too much of an enzyme and you have people who produce too little of an enzyme. But only the people that produce too little, they are like observed because it causes some visible symptoms that are observable. So it's not, I think it's plausible to imagine that just like there are people who focus too much on some things, there are people who focus too much on the other opposite side of the spectrum of things. And things, you can consider them like as information. You can say that it's either it lies in the context or it lies in the details. And of course, you have a big spectrum in it. And the reason you can bring the cover of the book, please, Jack. The reason I talk about the magnifying glass is because I'm saying that every one of us sees perception through a magnifying glass. And the magnifying glass has a focus. And you see perfectly things that are at the focus distance, and you see less well things that are outside of focus. And so if you have a focus which is here, you see very well the details, and you see very badly the context which is here. But so you would also imagine that if you have a focus here, because biological quantities are usually distributed on a spectrum, then automatically you will have trouble seeing something which is here.
Luca, can I ask it?
Yeah, just
sorry, go ahead.
limitation. I'm not saying that it's what's happening. But I think that's extremely plausible that it's what's happening. And unless I see a good reason to think that's not what's happening, I think that's a possibility that we should consider. Yeah, please.
So on the left side of the spectrum, under the Luca theory of autism, is this feels to me? So this would be people where it's everything is context, nothing is details. So are these people who I'm trying to like get a picture of this in my head, like people where like everything is like their social life, everything is kind of hierarchy of those around them, like that kind of thing? How would you do, or do you have any examples of this that, you know, in pop culture or something that we might be able to like?
So I would say that there are people like that when you say something, they remember the gist, but they do not focus on like the exact words.
Oh,
Or
yeah. I got some friends like that.
if you have the book, you can show in the first pages there are the 3 pictures of the magnifying glass. Maybe you can show to people so that it's a great example. So you have the first, yeah, exactly. So this would be like most people. Sorry, this would be like
It's this
yeah,
one,
like
and
most
then
people see it. No, yeah, please go the other one, the other one,
okay.
the other one. Yeah, most people see sentences like this. So you read part of the sentence and you can keep it all in your mind, and you base the meaning based on everything. So in this case, you can go hunting with a knife, and then you think about the context of this, and because you can think that it's hunting, you can think that the completion is and kill a bear. Then you can go to the next image. Yeah, this is like how people feel like people that you wouldn't say that are autistic. Like some people, they're just a bit more attuned to detail and a bit less attuned to context, which means that they tend to see things with less context. And so they move the magnifying glass and they focus on the last part, a knife end. And so maybe you say, so you can go hunting with a knife and a fork, which doesn't make sense from the overall context, but because you're restricting the context, it makes sense. A knife and a fork. And this is still like not like normal people. So right now we are looking at 2 peoples which are here and here. Now if you can show the third image, this instead is how a person with autism is looking, is considering things. Extreme focus on detail. They can see things that other people will not see. So for example, they can see the font. And maybe if there is a little dot of ink on the page, they will focus on the dot of ink and they will think, what's the meaning of the dot of ink? And because the dot of ink is here and is not there, they will think that those 2 words are different. And everything gets more confusing. On the other side, because you have no context, you are hand. How do you complete end? Everything could go after end. So that's kind of what I think is kind of like the perception. And then you can, so that's kind of like the idea that I want to give. Like, the more you have context, the less you can focus on detail. It's not a conscious choice. But because our brain works so well, it has a lot of fallback mechanisms and so on and so forth. You will look for meaning. You will not notice that you have incomplete information. You will look for meaning in that. And then, yeah, the kind of meanings that you see then are different. And then if you see something, you cannot have a proper discussion with people that have a complete different, that see different things. So for example, one of the things that I believe is that we shouldn't just, like, imagine that you have a family and or a friend. You have a friend with autism, for example, and communication is very difficult. For me, if what you want to achieve is proper communication, you cannot see only the person with autism as a problem. What you need to see is that you have 2 people which are receptive to different things, which have different communicative styles, which are receptive to different things, and there is a mismatch. And if what you want to achieve is a communication, then it makes no sense to assume that one is right and the other one is the problem, or the other way around. You just need to make both understand how the other person, or if one person is unable to understand, you need to get the other person which can understand, and you need to get the other people to talk with the things which are signal to the other person, and to try to reduce noise as much as possible.
That's really fascinating. You know, my my sister works with autistic children, and I know she will find this absolutely fascinating. It's not something I've gone super in depth about, but I'm so glad we have that question from Matthias, because that was awesome.
Yes, thank you, Matthias. And I just want to add one more thing. So in the book, I'm specifically focusing on people who are just a bit on the autistic spectrum, but not too much. So people who can still function in society, but just not like average, let's say. So if you give, so what you see is that if you give this book to someone who instead focuses on working with serious cases, they will not like the book. Simply because that's not the focus. It's optimized for certain, and that's why, for example, the book has a lot of great reviews from people who have friends or with Asperger's, or children or with Asperger's, and this situation, and instead got almost no recognition in clinical literature. Also because we're talking about focusing about different things, and
Awesome.
That was why I was it was one of the first ones. It was your first book that I read, because my brother has Asperger's, and you know, it's grew up together, pretty similarly aged, and so I was really interested in it.
Okay.
We have another question. I don't know if we have a cutoff time for this. I'm not in any special rush.
Yeah, we normally run for an hour, but obviously, you know, we're comfortable for as long as the guest is comfortable. I think Jeff was next in the queue, so let's
That's right.
Let's bring Jeff on the line. Hi, Jeff. Feel free to ask Luca your question.
Okay, good evening, guys. Luca, buonasera. So, before I ask my question, I wanted to thank you for your explanation regarding the context and detailed thing. As I have actually an autistic friend, I think she's Asperger's. She doesn't know. She's not made some diagnostic, but anyway, I'm definitely going to buy the book then. So here's my question, which is kind of out of context, but I guess that you're currently located in the Italy and thus in the Eurozone. As a matter of fact, living in France makes me feel like we're in the same boat. Besides, I'm following a couple of guys repeating this, that the Europe is kind of a zone of all fragilities, as if they were predicting its imminent collapse, even though one cannot predict events like this, as Taleb repeated again and again. I think that Europe's definitely a centralized and fragile system, but in spite of the global lockdown and worldwide crisis, it doesn't feel like it is going to collapse. So have you got any opinion on that?
Jeff, that is the best question I've heard in a while. Will Europe collapse? Hell yeah. Luca, all you.
Well, it depends on like what you think about what's your definition of Europe and what's your definition of collapse. Meaning, like, question is the current system untenable? Probably. Does it mean that the current system will completely disappear? Probably not. Like, we have like a lot of spectrums, we have a lot of solutions, and yeah. So, for example, like one thing is that the problem is like scale is a problem, of course. Comes with some advantages, also a lot of problems. But you can fractalize scale, or you can like give more autonomy to the regions. You can decide like what measures are done. You can decide what's the competencies of, for example, the European Parliament, the European Union. So there is a lot of leeway on that. And I think that there is also like there will probably be, so what happens, like some pressures against it. We've seen it with the Brexit, for example. That's a huge pressure on that. We've seen it with other things. So I think that like definitely the system will have to adapt. I don't think it will disappear for different reasons.
What about the euro as a currency?
Okay, yeah, the euro. The euro is interesting. There is this great piece by Conrad Barnstable on what's the effects of the euro, which I recommend. Okay, finance is definitely not my.
Excuse me, can you repeat the name of the person or book you're recommending?
Conrad Barnstable, I think.
Okay.
Barnstable, I'm not sure.
Barnstable, okay.
Yeah, I found
Thanks.
him too. I think through Rory Sutherland. I think I found him. Anyway.
Got it.
So I cannot speak. I don't know if the piece is completely fully exact, but I think that it makes some good points. And in particular, I think that the euro has some problems and has some advantages. And I don't know. For example, I'm thinking about Italy. It constrains Italy. It also constrains some of the downsides.
Mm-hmm.
In a way, it provides a bit of protection against a terrible government. Whether the euro has been good for you or not depends a lot on how much you're manufacturing and how much you're manufacturing compared to the others. It depends on how much you're exporting. So it's very complex.
Mm-hmm. Well,
So
I'd say like there's definitely pros and cons. I mean, as you said, pros and cons to a bigger monetary system, but it does feel like, in the context of our conversation, it brings more fragilities to it. Just being,
yes, it brings fragility.
It feels like a big bed of progress.
Sorry?
It feels like a big bed of progress where everyone has the same currency, where the economies are different.
Yes, exactly. It's a big bed of progress. I really don't like this part. But how much I like it is a different question on whether I think it will stay. It's a very different question. And I think that at least in the medium term, I think that it will stay. Mostly because like whether getting into the euro is good is a different question from whether getting out is good.
mm-hmm.
And there is like a lot of like hysteresis in that. And if you weren't very convinced of getting in, there is a level to which maybe it was better if you didn't get in, but once you're in, it's very difficult to get out. Or at least if you get out, it's going to take a lot of time. And so, okay, I'm definitely not an expert and not the right question to ask for it, but I think that the euro is likely to stay for a bit.
Okay, thank you.
We had one, looks like one final one from Ambivalent that was a bit of a follow-up question. Do you want to ask that, or you want me to read that?
Let's unmute him and see if he.
Yeah.
Oh,
feels
just
like
read it.
hopping on.
We'll let Jack read it out then. I think he's shy.
All right. Luca, can you make some connections regarding social cycle theory and ergodicity or anti-fragility?
What's social cycle theory?
I actually don't know. Sebastian, do you know what social cycle theory is?
I don't. Let's unmute Ambivalent and ask him. Ambivalent, you're on the line. Clarify for us what it is social cycle theory.
Oh, he's typing.
I think he's going to type the response.
Yeah.
While he's typing, what I will say, we're going to just do some closing comments and wrap this up after Ambivalent's question. But what we normally do on the Q&As is invite people into the happy hour breakout room after the official chat. Anyone who's been to the Fat Tony's happy hours know it's much more freestyle, chaotic video conversation. Luca, you are more than welcome to come and join us. That's absolutely no obligation, but obviously it would be great if you would. That won't be recorded, but it is
better not be recorded. That's where, yeah, that's when we definitely don't want to record. I'll be on that in about it's 1:07 this time, 2:00 this time, because I gotta talk to an advisor after this. But yeah, cool. that'll be great. All right, let's see what Ambivalent has. All right, posted some links. This is a lot of details. I don't know if I'm going to be able to break this down in the time allotted.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, there is I can see, like, to answer like the question strictly, I can see that there is like definitely a link with ergodicity, meaning that ergodicity has to do with like path dependence, and it definitely also has to do with anti-fragility, meaning that a lot of time you go to a cycle where you have like some entity. In this case, we can take like one of the classes in the lower social circle, and then generally what happens is that I go back to my scheme here. One second, I just don't see myself anymore, so I cannot see okay.
We still got you.
So where was it? Yeah. So you have this this line that I've shown before. So just to remind you, here is the stressor. Here is when you small stressor, no damage. Here you have medium stressor, anti-fragile, and here you have big stressor and fragile reaction. So what happens is that you have a class. It starts like this. Then it gets hit by stressors here. It gets stronger. Because it gets stronger, this one goes here, and this one goes here. So it becomes stronger, but because this one got here, you have some stressors that were hitting here, and before were hitting the anti-fragile zone. Now even here they're hitting the node zone. So then you get the opposite reaction, and it fragilizes. So you have like this ongoing between anti-fragility and fragility. But these things, they happen with a lag. Like how much something actually strong is usually different from how it perceived to be strong, or from the strength it manages to project, or the power it manages to gather. So what happens is that because of this lag, every time that you have a lag in the complex systems, you have oscillating behaviors. And so because you have oscillating behavior, you have basically this up and down, rise and fall of things and so on. And in this case, it's like you get the circle, like you have the different prominences of classes over time. Now, that said, I cannot comment on like how on the social, what's the name of the social cycle? I cannot comment on it because I've just seen it now, but that's basically like the link with anti-fragility, and why when you have like complex systems and anti-fragile entities, then you have like usually this kind of oscillating behavior.
Yeah, the social cycle theory as presented kind of reminds me of that old aphorism about, you know, like the rich guy works really hard to get or the guy works really hard to become rich, and then the kids kind of blow all, which I've seen in first person real life. Kids blow all the money, and then their kids are poor, and kind of sometimes the cycle continues, sometimes it doesn't. But it looked a little bit like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I never understood whether how much of it is actually like the causation, and how much of this is just like regression to the mean, or like can be explained just by drawing like random personalities out of an urn and assigning them to the different people. Probably it's both.
It reminds me as well, there's that, I'm paraphrasing here because I don't know the exact quote, but it's the old, you know, I work as a laborer so my son can be a merchant. My son works as a merchant so his son can be an artist. And that's, I mean, I only briefly glanced at the social cycle theory, but from what I see, it kind of reminded me of that as well. Guys, I think we better wrap up here. We've kept Luca well over time. Guys, Luca, absolutely eye-opening stuff here. Loads of food for thought. You can grab his books on Amazon and Gumroad. We're going to post links to that on Fat Tony's Twitter. Me and Jack are going to tweet them. We're going to stick them on YouTube below as well. Any other channels I'm missing out, Luca, where we can find out more about your stuff?
Oh, no, it's mainly like Twitter. I have a newsletter, of course, on my website, luca-dellanna.com. And regarding the books, I just want to clarify two things. So the first one is that books on medical research, so in this case, the books on autism, I always make the digital form free, just because I think that like, yeah, it's just so important. And the second thing is if you want the ebook, you can get it both from Amazon and Gumroad. Please get it from Gumroad. It's going to be better for you because when I do a second edition, you get also the second edition. And it's also better for me because Gumroad gives more royalties than Amazon.
Great.
Oh yeah, that's the best part. And let me ask, is there anything else that you want to plug? Podcasts or anything you've been on, or your newsletter, anything like it that everyone here should check out?
No, don't know too much.
All right.
I have actually, I will post it here. I have like a digest that I do with this, with one tool of my favorite Twitter accounts. Maybe I will post it later on Discord. And yeah, that's it. And yeah, again, I have the adaptive system course, which is starting this Tuesday. And if you want to register, there are only like 4 places left on the evening group. So yeah, you're welcome.
There's like 16 people here. Yeah, hopefully we can get that taken care of.
Yeah,
that'd be
build
cool.
out before the end of the night. Get them while they're before they go, guys. All right, Luca, it's been an absolute pleasure, guys. If anyone,
thank you.
Yeah,
thank you so much for inviting.
No problem.
And Luca is known to drop into Fat Tony's from time to time as well. So if you do have any more questions in the future, you might be able to catch him there or on Twitter.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Luca. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Luca. It's been fun.
Take care. Bye-bye.
As well.